The Institute of Isotopes Company Limited in Hungary manufactures RIA kits capable of high-precision measurements. Measurement precision depends on whether the conditions set out in the instructions for use are met and the instructions are observed. This film provides support in this regard. RIA kits enable the realization of high-precision measurements when employees work in a disciplined way with the adequate tools and strictly following the user instructions. It is extremely important that the users of RIA kits undergo regular trainings held by highly experienced professionals. Radioimmunoassay as a laboratory measurement technique was the first among immunoassays and still provides the most reliable and accurate measurement results. In case of non-automated RIA procedures, it must be ensured that the tools and instruments used are up to date and meet the technical requirements. Appropriate training shall be provided for staff performing manual processing so that they work in a correct way. Only then will the RIA kits provide reliable, reproducible, and accurate laboratory results. The tracer component of RIA contains the radioactive iodine-125 isotope. Its half-life is 60 days. This means that as the expiry date approaches, an even lower CPM value will be received. Although the kit provides appropriate precision at its expiry date, it is even better to use the kits while they are still fresh. It is not appropriate to delay processing until the last minute. This film demonstrates how to use the kits in order to receive reliable and accurate results. RIA kits should be stored in the refrigerator between 2 and 8 degrees Celsius until the expiry date indicated on the packaging. The kit should be stored in a structured and orderly way. It is not permitted to take the components out of the packaging and regroup them in order to save space. This may often lead to the unintentional mixing up of the components. The appropriate loading method is when the components are kept in their original packaging. The boxes with the earliest expiry date should be put in the front, and the newest boxes in the back. This may also be done by ranking the shelves. Inappropriate loading of the refrigerator is not allowed. False results may be due to the processing of mixed kits. This is not permitted. The kits to be processed should be chosen from among those that expire the earliest. This way, the principle of FIFO, first in, first out, applies. Before using the RIA kit, always take the box out of the refrigerator in time, open it, and put the components on the table. All the reagents must warm up to room temperature, 18 to 30 degrees Celsius. Usually, it takes 30 minutes to 1 hour to reach thermal equilibrium. The larger the reagent volume, the longer the time needed to reach the appropriate temperature. Reproducibility of measurement results is best when working with components equilibrated to ambient room temperature. Forced heating compromises the quality of the kit components. Do not place the reagents next to radiators, under direct sunlight or lamps in order to speed up warming. This is forbidden. The size of the reagents determines the time needed to reach the appropriate temperature. The instructions for use provide information on the minimum time needed. In case a component is freeze-dried, ambient temperature distilled water is needed for reconstitution. Make sure that patient samples are also equilibrated to room temperature. In general, the laboratory temperature should be between 20 and 25 degrees Celsius, maximum 18 to 30 degrees Celsius, and should be kept constant. In case the patient samples were stored in a freezer, the samples must be homogenized by vortex mixing after thawing. Frozen samples tend to segregate, producing false results without homogenization. Do not use visibly lipemic or hemolyzed samples. The test tubes in the kits are not always marked individually, therefore care should be taken not to mix the tubes from different kits. The tubes should be labeled with alcohol markers during their use. Label coated tubes in duplicate for standards, as any error will appear in several samples throughout the standard curve. In case of standard measurements, any kind of error during the process may affect the results significantly. Use only the components of a single opened kit for the measurement. A partially used component that was opened and touched by a pipette tip deteriorates more rapidly than an unopened component. Therefore, the opened and unopened reagents should not be mixed later. Make sure the pipettes are regularly calibrated and their accuracy and precision is checked. Imprecise or poorly calibrated pipettes produce erroneous results. Choose the correct size of adjustable volume pipette for the volume of the reagent. If you want to dispense 50 microliters of solution, and you have one pipette that can be set to a volume between 5 and 50 microliters, and you have another one between 40 and 200 microliters, then choose the pipette with 5 to 50 microliters and adjust it to 50 microliters. Pipettes are most accurate in their higher range settings. The standards must be homogenized by vortex mixing. When pipetting the standards, start pipetting from the lowest concentration to the highest. This way, the sample pipette tip can be used for all the standards. When working with patient samples, discard the pipette tips after every sample to avoid contamination. This is very important. Dispense the samples or the standard solutions against the bottom of the test tube. Never shoot or squirt the liquid. The procedure cannot take more than 20 minutes. Make sure that between pipetting the first and the last sample, not more than 20 minutes have elapsed. Do not interrupt the procedure. It is forbidden to make phone calls. It is forbidden to have coffee breaks or lunch breaks. For dispensing the tracer reagents, we recommend using repeating semi-automated pipettes. After drawing up the solution, 10 to 15 dispensation volumes can be made, which speeds up the work. Do not use non-repeating pipettes. There is no need to carefully pipette the tracer solution into the bottom of the test tubes. It can be simply dispensed into the lower thirds of the tubes. Place the tubes on the shaker after pipetting and turn on the shaker immediately. During the incubation period, a solid phase reaction takes place, where the tracer molecules have to reach the reagents on the surface of the test tubes. This is a very slow process with the diffusional movement of the molecules. This may be achieved by shaking the tubes with a shaker. If the shaking is not intensive enough, it will not accelerate the reaction sufficiently. This is forbidden. The solid phase reaction may be accelerated by forcing the intensive flow of the liquids in the tubes. The solid phase reaction may be accelerated by adjusting the correct shaking speed. The stronger the flow within the tubes, the faster the process will be. The intensive flow of the liquid can be easily seen. It is very important to have the same intensity in every tube. Attention should be given to the placement of the shaker. Do not put the shaker under air conditioning facilities. Do not place the shaker next to open windows, and do not expose the kits on the shaker to radiant heat or solar radiation. This is forbidden. Fix every test tube firmly in the test tube rack while they are on the shaker. Choose adequate plastic racks. The tubes should not wobble or slip. Reaction speed also depends on the temperature. The shakers are driven by electric motors which generate heat during operation. If the motor is not separated by thermal insulation, the temperature may increase in the middle of the shaker, making the results unreliable. The even distribution of heat that moves through the insulation is ensured by an inserted metal plate. Flow intensity in the tubes is affected by two parameters of the shaker. On the one hand, the amplitude of shaking, which is given in millimeters, and on the other hand, the speed of shaking, given in RPM, that is, rotations per minute. The average amplitude of shakers is 2 to 4 millimeters. The optimum for processing RIA kits is 4 millimeters. For RIA kits, use shakers with a minimum shaker speed of 400 to 600 RPM. Low shaking amplitude may be compensated by a higher shaking speed. Unfortunately, shakers with an amplitude higher than 8 to 10 millimeters cannot be adjusted to the appropriate speed, as they usually cannot reach more than 200 to 300 RPM. The shaker should be heavy enough to prevent the shaker from moving around on the laboratory table and to shake the racks and not the body of the shaker. It is recommended to use shakers with a mass of minimum 5 to 10 kilograms or attach a thick solid steel spacer. It is a mistake to use equipment unsuitable for our purposes. The tube should be under identical conditions during shaking. The flow and the temperature should be the same in every tube. The rack should be tightly fixed on the shaker so that they do not slip during the intensive shaking. It is important that the racks be distributed symmetrically. The asymmetric distribution of the racks is forbidden. When processing a given kit, every test tube should be put on the same shaker. Do not divide the tubes among several shakers because it is difficult to set them to the same speed even if they are of the same type. Shakers of different models or brands are not compatible, and using different shakers for the tubes may lead to a distortion of the results. The duration of the shaking may be the same or a bit longer than what is set out in the instructions for use of the kit. Do not arbitrarily shorten the time. Choosing a somewhat longer incubation time instead of the required 60 minutes is permitted. We may improve the reliability of the kit with an extended shaking time, in case the shaker we use is not particularly suitable. If the incubation time is considerably longer than 1 hour, use parafilm to close the tubes during the shaking to prevent vaporizing. Due to evaporation, non-washable, non-specific layers are created on the surface of the tube, which produce false results. After incubation, remove the racks from the shaker. If the test tube racks do not have a bottom plate, then use a metal sheet supplied by our company. After incubation, the measurable radioactive signal is bound to the internal surface of the RIA tubes. The liquid shall be removed. Read the instructions for use. Invert the liquid into a suitable drain with a single quick movement. Then place the tubes in the upside down position, together with the metal sheet on a surface covered with absorbent paper, and tap the tubes firmly against the paper to remove the drops from the sides of the tubes. The aim is to carefully remove the reaction mixture. Without the bottom plate, the tubes in the rack cannot be tapped against the paper surface, causing uncertain measurement results. Where washing is required in the instructions for use, add the required amount of washing buffer into the tubes with a suitable dispenser. Do not use pipettes for this operation. Change the absorbent paper for a new one after every measurement. Be careful, because if we turn the rack upside down, slowly a part of the liquid may flow back on the external side of the tubes and contaminate the tubes and the racks with radioactivity. This contamination may be later transferred to other tubes as well. This seriously affects the reliability of the measurements. Wash the shaker racks at least once a month to remove the accidental radioactive remains. Soak the plastic racks in hypochlorite tap water for a few hours in a larger flask. Then rinse it with running water. In the ready-to-measure test tubes, the radioactive molecules are on the inner surface of the tubes in a thin, transparent layer that is invisible to the naked eye. Their radioactivity can be measured with a gamma counter, and the computer of the gamma counter prints out the results. For the functioning of the RIA kits, the concentration values of the standard curves are essential. The counter calculates the results for patient samples from these concentrations. Be careful, as for many RIA kits, the manufacturer declares new concentration data for every new batch of standards. In such cases, the standard values of the given kit must be adjusted in the gamma counter in the laboratory. In most medical laboratories, multi-channel gamma counters are used, and in these cases, it is very important that every detector well measures the activity in the tubes with the same efficiency. To this end, the counters have to be calibrated and standardized. This should be done once every 3 months. Ask for the assistance of an expert in case you are not familiar with the procedure. Gamma counters have specific fitting plastic measuring racks. Do not place the test tubes into the counter without a rack, as there is a serious risk of contaminating the surface of the detector well with a test tube that is potentially contaminated on its outer surface. Even a very slight contamination of the well may cause serious deviations, for example, in the sample results of patients with hyperthyroidism. Even if we pay careful attention, it may happen that the plastic racks of the gamma counters become contaminated with radioactivity. Soak the plastic racks in hypochlorite tap water for a few hours in a larger flask often, at least once a month. Then rinse it with running water. Before starting a measurement on the gamma counter, make sure that the background of all the wells are below 50 cpm. Then measure every plastic counter rack to be used. If we get a value higher than 50 cpm in any of the wells, the rack has to be cleaned. It may happen that the counter itself is contaminated. As a first step, switch off the computer and the gamma counter properly. Start cleaning only after disconnecting the power supply. During the cleaning, possible contamination and radioactive contamination is removed. The latter is called decontamination. For decontamination, use a slightly alcoholic cellulose wipe. The wipe must be wet but should not be soaked in the alcoholic solution. Every channel has to be cleaned one by one with a circular movement of the wipe. Choose the most suitable curve offered by the gamma counter that fits the given RIA kit the best. Put the tube into the rack and put the rack into the counter. Use a measurement time of at least 1 minute on the gamma counter. A shorter counting time is not recommended as it will compromise the precision of the results. The Institute of Isotopes Company Limited manufactures kits capable of high-precision measurements. It can supply its customers with fresh kits every month according to the production schedule. The Institute of Isotopes Company Limited is committed to meeting all customer demands. We hope that this film facilitates the proper use of the kits and provides assistance during your work.